Every April, NFL teams roll the dice on young prospects, hoping to land the next generational talent. However, not all draft classes are created equal. While some years produce a handful of Pro Bowlers, others leave an indelible mark on the league. Picking the ultimate draft year from several decades of the NFL draft might sound like an impossible task, but the only real way to settle the debate once and for all involves using a March Madness-style showdown with a bracket of 8 of the greatest NFL draft classes ever. Jumping right into the showdown of epic proportions, we have 8 of the best NFL draft classes in the quarterfinal matchup, which will be judged based on Hall of Fame talent, depth, and overall impact on the NFL. Quarterfinals 1983 draft versus the 2004 draft. For our first matchup, we have the 1983 draft versus the 2004 draft, and as the opening matchup, it definitely sets the stage for the crazy face-offs to come. Starting things off with the 1983 NFL Draft, which is legendary for its quarterback revolution, producing 3 Hall of Famers in John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly, a trio that redefined the position and combined for 11 Super Bowl appearances. Add in all-time greats like Eric Dickerson, Bruce Matthews, and Darrell Green, and you have a class dripping with elite-worthy talent. But don't underestimate the 2004 Draft, which boasts an impressive roster of QBs like Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, and Ben Roethlisberger, who combined for 5 Super Bowl wins. Beyond the signal callers, 2004 delivered generational stars like Larry Fitzgerald, Vince Wilfork, and Jared Allen, plus underrated gems like Steven Jackson and Darnell Dockett. For our verdict, we believe that the 2004 draft class might feature a well-balanced roster with a championship pedigree. But with 3 Hall of Famers, you just can't argue with the explosive QB talent of the 1983 draft. Quarterfinals, 1996 draft versus 2017 draft. Next up, we have the 1996 draft versus the 2017 draft class, and right off the bat, the 1996 draft is headlined by 2 all-time greats who defined their positions. Ray Lewis and Marvin Harrison. Between them, we have 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, Super Bowl MVP, and 8 Pro Bowls. When you add in other Hall of Famers like Jonathan Ogden and Terrell Owens, plus impact players like Eddie George and Keyshawn Johnson, you have a class that dominated for over a decade. As for the 2017 draft class, it has hands down given us the most transformational class of the modern era, with the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Mahomes crashes the party as 2-time MVP with a 3-time Super Bowl champ, while Kelce stands proud as the greatest tight end of his generation. When you add in defensive monsters like Myles Garrett and T.J. Watt, you have a solid draft class that looks unbeatable on paper. This round was tight with Mahomes bringing the fire, but we have to give it to the 1996 draft class with 5 Hall of Famers and better all-around talent. Quarterfinals, 2001 draft versus 1998 draft. With the second matchup settled, we are moving on to the next quarterfinal brawl between the 2001 draft and the 1998 draft. The first name that comes to mind when anyone talks of the 2001 draft class has to be LaDainian Tomlinson, a generational Hall of Fame running back with the single-season TD record, and following him is Super Bowl MVP Drew Brees and 7-time All-Pro guard Steve Hutchinson. Just when you think that's all the draft class has to offer, you remember top players like Richard Seymour, Reggie Wayne, and Justin Smith. You'd think the 2001 draft class is a no-brainer with such star power, but legendary QB Peyton Manning alone tilts the scale over. When you pair him with Hall of Famers like Charles Woodson, Randy Moss, Alan Faneca, and Kyle Turley, you've got a class that dominated for 15-plus years. It might be painful to see a team with Brees, LT, and Wayne losing, but they are up against players who are arguably top 5 in their positions. So 1998 wins this round. Quarterfinals, 2011 draft versus 1981 draft. Next up, we have the 2011 draft versus the 1981 draft class. And with the 2011 draft, we have a relatively modern class that exploded with generational talent, producing 3 first-ballot Hall of Famers in its first 6 picks. Cam Newton, Von Miller, and J.J. Watt has enough feats to put some draft classes to shame. When you add in all-pros like Julio Jones, Richard Sherman, and Tyron Smith, plus underrated steals like Justin Houston and Jason Kelce, you have a class that dominated the 2010s. As for the 1981 draft class, we have the GOAT defender Lawrence Taylor, Ronnie Lott, and Bears' defensive anchor Mike Singletary. You can also throw in other names like Howie Long and Russ Grimm to complete the old-school NFL royalty, which built dynasties. No matter how much we love our old-school players, the clear winners of the 2011 draft, especially when you realize that it's the deepest defensive draft ever with elite-level players in multiple positions. Semifinal, 1983, draft versus 2011 draft. Now that we have our winners for the quarterfinals, we are shooting straight to the semifinals with the first matchup being the 1983 draft versus 2011 draft. Despite the 2011 draft class coming in hot as the deepest defensive draft ever, you really have to appreciate the 1983 draft for being the gold standard for quarterback glory, delivering 3 first-ballot Hall of Famers in John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly. Apart from their combined 17 Pro Bowls, other all-time greats like Eric Dickerson, Bruce Matthews, and Darrell Green make up the class that built the modern NFL. When you lay the cards out like that, it's easy to realize that it was never a competition in the first place, and the 1983 draft class is the winner. Semifinals 1996 draft versus 1998 draft. Moving on, we have the final matchup in the semifinal round with the 1996 draft against the 1998 draft, and right out the gate, it's clear that this is the most brutal matchup to date. On one hand, you have the 1996 draft with its defensive masterclass that reshaped the league for a decade as Ray Lewis became the heart of the Ravens' historic defense, while Jonathan Ogden anchored their offensive line as a future Hall of Famer. The class also delivered Marvin Harrison and Terrell Owens, 2 receivers who redefined the position. Throw in Eddie George's relentless rushing and Zach Thomas's tackling machine prowess, and you have a group that dominated on both sides of the ball. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the 1998 draft, which counters with arguably the greatest quarterback-receiver duo in draft history. Peyton Manning as 5-time MVP and Randy Moss with a single-season TD record. Add in Charles Woodson and Alan Faneca as 9-time Pro Bowl guard, and you've got a class that produced more Hall of Famers than any other 90s draft. Most football fans might find it hard to pick a winner between these 2 star-studded draft classes, but the star power of Manning and Moss gives the 1998 draft the edge to go on to the final. It's been a chaotic ride to the final of this March Madness-style brawl, but we are left with a monumental showdown between the 1983 draft and the 1998 draft, and you already know it's not going to be an easy one to decide. Like we said earlier, the 1983 draft class is all about the greatest quarterback draft of all time, headlined by John Elway, Dan Marino, and Jim Kelly, all of whom became Hall of Famers and franchise-changing players. Elway won 2 Super Bowls with the Broncos, Kelly led the Bills to 4 straight AFC championships, and Marino set passing records that stood for decades. Beyond quarterbacks, the draft produced Hall of Famers like Eric Dickerson, Bruce Matthews, Darrell Green, and Richard Dent, adding to its historic status. The depth was impressive, with several other Pro Bowlers and longtime starters who helped shape the league throughout the 80s and 90s. You'd think there's no way to top the quarterback-heavy roster of the 1983 draft class, but the 1998 draft features Peyton Manning as the greatest quarterback of all time, who revolutionized the position and won 2 Super Bowls with his football IQ and leadership. When you chip in Charles Woodson as the greatest defensive back ever, it feels unfair to even compare them to other draft classes. This leaves the 1998 draft as the undisputed champions of our draft class showdown. Do you guys disagree with any of our choices? Join the conversation and let us know in the comments below.